Good morning, everyone. It is an honor to be here today speaking to you. I have some notes because I have 15 minutes, so I wanted to make sure that I get through everything. I could talk about this for quite some time. So I'd like to share a bit about myself. After having studied film at multiple colleges, universities, and studio programs, I've been in the film and television industry for over 20 years. I initially worked as a wildlife filmmaker, mostly in Africa. I worked with Dr. Jane Goodall and the United Nations Environment Program. And I eventually transitioned to writing and directing narrative films and television. Most recently, I sold a TV show to Amazon International. So in addition to filmmaking, I have several passions. I'm an avid skier, and I was first put into ski boots at 16 months of age. I also love ballet, and I dance 4 to 5 times a week. And in June, I was fortunate to participate in an inaugural program with the New York City Ballet. I am passionate about wildlife conservation, and one of the most moving experiences of my life was trekking the mountain gorillas in Uganda and Rwanda. And it was an honor to be on the steering committee for a concert at the Royal Opera House celebrating the centennial anniversary of the discovery of the mountain gorilla. I am passionate about traveling, and I have explored over 50 countries. After I graduated college, I backpacked solo around the world, which was a life-changing experience. And it greatly influences in the way in which I view the world. At the end of the day, we are far more alike than we are different. And it's that awareness of our similarities that drives my passion as a storyteller. Traveling leads to understanding cultures, and it creates empathy. And as a storyteller, I want to build bridges between people and between cultures. So stories matter, and who tells our stories, and who tells our stories matters even more. I am passionate about bringing people together and about telling the stories of people either forgotten by history or those who have been misrepresented. I believe that through the transcendence of film, our world can become kinder and more tolerant. So here's a question for the room. Thinking of a film, guys, how did it make you feel? Maybe it made you laugh at a time you really needed it, or maybe it even gave you a good cry. Maybe it inspired you to take a new adventure or to change something in your life. That is the power of storytelling. A good film moves hearts and minds. So, what film is referenced as having most inspired Hollywood film directors? That would be Lawrence of Arabia. In fact, Steven Spielberg has praised it as the film that set him on his filmmaking journey. So why am I bringing up Hollywood directors? Because 80% of all media consumed worldwide is made by Hollywood. And that plays a pivotal role in our perceptions. And while they point to Lawrence of Arabia as their most inspiring film, let's talk a bit about Hollywood has been representing Arabs for over the past 100 years. So Dr. Jack Shaheen, who was a leading scholar on Hollywood stereotyping of Arabs, said, during Hollywood's first 50 years, the available parts were lascivious sheikhs for men, handmaidens and belly dancers for women, and in the second half, bumbling billionaires, battered wives, Islamic fundamentalists, and since the shifting geopolitical landscape of the 1990s, the ultimate boogeyman, the Muslim terrorist. In fact, a recent study conducted by the Middle Eastern and North African Arts Advocacy Coalition, which is an advocacy group in Hollywood, which was founded by the actress Aziza Ghanizadeh, found that 78% of the time that a Middle Eastern and North African character is on screen, they are seen as a threat. Terrorists and tyrants. Aziza Ghanizadeh has said, "We were completely invisible until they needed a stereotype. All the scripts I was getting, I'd been betrayed and married off to a terrorist, but I'm strong in the end and stand up to my terrorist husband, fighting for the American way." So movies have the power to shape and to distort the way we view the world, particularly those elements of the world that fall beyond our everyday experience. there are large swaths of America where the only Arab an American ever sees is on a TV or movie screen. Research shows that people tend to rely on characterizations from film and television to formulate beliefs about groups with whom they may be less familiar. And the continual portrayal of Arabs as one-dimensional threats fuels the anxiety that leads to actions like the most recent Muslim ban in the United States. Dr. Shaheen notes, stereotypes impact an opinion, and opinions impact policy. Words and images teach us whom we should love and whom we should hate. Imagine if every time a white man was in a film and he played a Nazi. So what would somebody think who's never seen a white man before? Well, that all white men are Nazis. Unfortunately, the representation of women by Hollywood isn't much better. Despite women being 52% of the population, 96% of all films and TV shows made in Hollywood are directed by men. Now, as we discussed, who makes our stories matter? And like in any business, when we lack diversity in our storytellers, we lose diversity of thought and we see the world through only one perspective, the male gaze. Now, the male gaze is a term that was coined by film critic Laura Mulvey to describe the cinematic angle of a heterosexual male on a female character, where she exists in the story primarily to serve him, his interests, and his storyline. The woman is often passive to the active gaze of the man, reflecting an underlying power asymmetry. The camera may linger over the curves of her body, quite literally positioning her visually as an object of male desire. Like this screenshot of Megan Fox in Michael Bay's movie Transformers. The viewer identifies with the male gaze of the director. Now, while the male gaze is about seen through the male-centric view, the female gaze isn't just about seen through a female character's perspective. It's about feeling what women experience. It treats all characters as three-dimensional and seeks to empathize with them, like in Sarah Gavron's Suffragette, where we feel the helplessness and powerlessness this woman is feeling and experiencing. She's center frame, the camera is on her face, and this is intentional. But with 96% of film and television directed by men, the male gaze is the industry default, and the female gaze is rare. So one might speculate that this imbalance is driven by the box office, that audiences are voting with their wallets for male-centric films, but the data actually says otherwise. The creative arts agency and tech company Shift7 conducted a study examining 350 of the top-grossing films between 2014 and 2017. And despite the fact that men were given the lead roles in about 2.5 times as many of the films, movies with female leads pulled in more revenue at the global box office at each budget level analyzed. So if the market is thirsting for female-led films, why are the employment opportunities for female directors statistically the same as they were 100 years ago, according to research from the British Film Institute? And why is it that in its 90-year history, only one woman has ever won the Oscar for Best Director, Catherine Bigelow, and only one woman, Barbra Streisand, has won a Golden Globe for Best Director in its 74-year history? If audiences have proven that they will pay to see female-led and female-directed films, why do women continue to struggle to get their projects off the ground in Hollywood? If we tell ourselves a false narrative for too long, that women's stories are less important, that Arabs are threats, we begin to believe it, despite what the data may tell us. As Dr. Martha Lawson from San Diego State University said, the representations we see on the big screen are part of a cultural system that entertains, but also instructs us on who we are and who we can become. At their most negative, the images limit us, but at their most positive, they inspire and set us free. So let's talk about some examples of films that created positive change and impacted society. So the 1942 film Bambi, which was about a young deer whose mother was killed by hunters, that led to a decrease in hunting by 50%. And 77 years later, the film is still relevant to the environment and wildlife protection. In fact, in 2018, a deer poacher was caught illegally killing hundreds of deer, and a judge sentenced him to watch Bambi once a month for the whole entire year while he was in prison. And the movie Sideways, which I don't know if many of you have seen, it's from 2004. It made over $100 million at the box office. It was nominated for 5 Oscars. 2 men on a road trip in Sonoma County drinking wine. Well, it's called the Sideways effect. And Pinot Noir production in California increased 170%. In fact, Pinots became the second most planted varietal in Sonoma County. And for anyone who's seen the film, it should come as no surprise that Merlot sales dropped. So back to Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence is one of the most iconic characters in all of Western history. He's a hero myth. He was created by the American journalist Lowell Thomas. And while history has long glorified the adventures of men such as T.E. Lawrence, few people in the West are aware that one of the most influential characters in the formation of the modern Middle East, the architect of the Kingdom of Iraq, was a woman, Gertrude Bell. Kingmaker, which is a feature film that I co-wrote with my husband, Brad Reister, who's here in the front row, tells the story of this extraordinary woman. So for those of you who may be unfamiliar with Gertrude Bell, she was an explorer, an archaeologist, who was recruited by British intelligence to leverage her close relationships and friendships with the Arab sheikhs in helping establish the British-Arab alliance that ultimately defeated the Ottoman forces in World War I. Gertrude was born into the freedoms and confines of the British upper crust, but she found her heart in the Middle East. She fell in love with it and its people. Here she declared, "I am a person," with a capital P. She battled her commanding officers for Arab independence, and she drew the borders of Iraq and crowned Faisal I as its first king. One of King Faisal I's most trusted advisors, Gertrude was revered as Iraq's uncrowned queen. She was described as one of the few representatives of His Majesty's government remembered by the Arabs with anything resembling affection. I first learned about Gertrude Bell several years ago, and I was completely enthralled by her fascinating yet little-known story. How was it that such an extraordinary woman has been all but forgotten by our Western history books? I am passionate about telling her story in a film, for it reframes our understanding of the role women played in history, and it provides an opportunity to present a three-dimensional representation of Arabs, something we sadly do not see enough of in films made for Western audiences. I believe that Kingmaker deserves to be told through the female gaze, for at its core, the film tells a love story, not about her relationships with men, but rather her love and respect for the Arab people and their cause for Arab independence. So I'd like to show you a mood reel that I put together for Kingmaker. It's a director's mood reel. Before I do, I'd like to share with you some of the tricks that we filmmakers use in visual composition to influence your emotions and psychological response to a story. Now, I literally could talk about this for hours, like I could probably talk about this for 5 hours. However, in the interest of time, I have consolidated everything into one slide, and I'm just going to give you a few basics in subliminal visual structure. For Gertrude, England was an emotionally closed society, rigid and confining. So in England, I'm going to film in saturated colors of blues and greens with cool tones. The set design will be vertical lines, squares, and shapes of rectangles to feel controlled and restricted. And by contrast, Gertrude felt alive in the Middle East. It was a world of endless possibility and ceaseless change. So in the Middle East, I'll film in desaturated colors of yellows and oranges and reds and bright and warm hues. Curved lines and circles and cylinders will give the freedom of flow, and flexibility. So, quickly, here's the mood reel. It was built from several clips of at least 25 films. You're going to see many actresses, Meryl Streep, Cate Blanchett, all representing Gertrude. The narration is from Gertrude's own writing, her letters and journals, and you'll see some of the visual structures that I referenced in my last slide regarding tone. And so here it is.
Forgive me, Father, this distance between us, but England is no longer my home. I could bear it no more, that gilded cage, so rigid, so confining. My spirit yearned for a freedom that England could never give. Perhaps I embarked on this journey seeking solace from Dick's death. It is true that I wanted to cut all links from the world, to fill all the hollow places with my sorrow for him. But on the road, in my solitude and under the starry skies, I've gone back to the joy of existence. Baghdad has wound itself around my heart. Things are happening here far greater than anything in England. The Arabs have welcomed me into their tents, into their lives. Here I am a person. Oh, Father, I miss you terribly, but we stand at the front of a storm. The Arabs fought by our sides, for we promised them an Arab kingdom, but with the war at its end, we now tell them they will never be free. If we do not honor our word, we will have a full-blown revolt on our hands. My colleagues refuse to listen, but I will not relent. I alone am friends with every tribal chief throughout the whole length and breadth of Iraq. I will make Iraq a great center of Arab civilization. I will make you proud of me, Father.
Thank you, everybody.